I was standing in the break room at work when my mother's voice cracked through the phone like she was announcing a weather update, not detonating a bomb. "Since you already cleared the remaining mortgage, we've decided the house will be your brother's graduation gift," she said. No hesitation. No guilt. Not even a lowered tone. I shifted the phone in my hand, certain I'd misheard. But then she added, almost sing-song, "And you don't need to come to the party. It's really just for him." The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was sharp. The kind that presses into your ribs. 5 years of juggling side jobs, cutting every personal expense, and grinding myself thin to save that house flashed through my mind in a single dizzy rush. I ended the call without speaking. Across from me, Uncle Edward, one of the few people who knew the truth, watched my face carefully. "You want to tell them," I asked quietly, "or should I?" Because I knew one thing with crystal clarity: this wasn't going to unfold the way they expected. I grew up in that 2-story house on a sleepy Rochester street. To outsiders, it looked like a warm, stable home: white siding, a porch with a stubborn light bulb, morning curtains my mother insisted on ironing. But inside, everything operated under one queen, Angela Dawson, my mother. She ran her world with certainty, and her version of reality beat all other versions into submission. My father, Gregory, followed her lead with quiet nods and long work hours that kept him conveniently uninvolved. And then there was my younger brother, Dylan, the golden child. For years behind me, yet somehow always in first place. He got the new phones, the upgraded rooms, the extra tutoring. I got, "You're tough. You'll be fine." By 16, the household rules were clear. Dylan first. Mom always right. Dad invisible. Me? Self-sufficient by necessity. Years later, while visiting home, I opened the kitchen drawer and found a stack of unopened bank envelopes. Mortgage notices. Heavy, stamped, ignored. My chest sank. They were months from losing the house. And the woman who bragged about holding the family together hadn't told a soul. That night, after doing the math alone in my childhood room, I made the choice she should have made. 5 years of payments, sacrificing my own milestones and plans, just so the house wouldn't slip away. She never mentioned my sacrifice again, except to take the praise. Which is why 3 days after that phone call, when I showed up at the annual family cookout, everything felt different. The lake breeze, the charcoal smoke, the familiar laughter, all of it wrapped around a lie they were proudly performing. And I was done playing along. But before I confronted them, before the truth exploded across that perfect event, something happened that none of them were prepared for, and it changed the entire trajectory of that day. Before we continue the story, please tell me your name and where you're listening from, and make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. The annual family cookout by Lake Ontario was supposed to feel nostalgic: grills smoking, sunscreen drifting through the air, kids sprinting across the grass, but that year, something felt staged. Like everyone else had been handed a script that excluded me. From across the park, I spotted Dylan in the middle of a laughing circle of cousins. They were already speaking about the house as if the keys were hanging around his neck. "When he moves in," one cousin said, "he should redo the yard. It'll be such a perfect starter home." Starter home. The phrase landed in my stomach like a stone. And then I heard the familiar voice I'd learned to brace for. My mother, Angela, stood near the grill retelling what she called the struggle years to an audience of neighbors and aunts. She gestured dramatically, shaking her head with the same rehearsed humility she always used when she wanted admiration. "It was brutal keeping the place afloat," she told them. "But you know me, I pushed through. I wasn't about to let the bank take our home." My breath caught in my throat. 5 years of my life, gone into those payments, and she was weaving herself into the hero role without hesitation. And the painful part? They nodded. They comforted. They admired. Nobody questioned her version. Behind her, my father hovered, adding the occasional agreeing hum, though I doubted he even remembered the details. His silence was a habit he'd worn so long it had molded into him. I clenched my jaw, swallowing down the urge to confront her right there. But before I could even decide what to do, my cousin, Nala, tugged me aside. She worked in financial services and had always been someone who whispered the truth when others swallowed the lies. "She's already trying to put the house in Dylan's name," she murmured. "But she can't, not yet. The trust your uncle set up is blocking it." The world sharpened. The trust. A document I barely remembered signing. Something Edward had insisted on just in case, though at the time, I didn't understand why he was so adamant. Suddenly I saw his reasoning with perfect clarity. Across the field, Uncle Edward sat at a picnic table, quietly observing the crowd with that calm, measured expression of his. He was the kind of man who noticed small cracks long before the rest of us stumbled over them. I walked toward him, the folder tucked under my arm, full of receipts, payment records, and trust documents. I hadn't intended to show them to anyone that day, but instinct had made me bring them anyway. He looked up as I approached, immediately reading the storm in my eyes. I set the folder on the table and opened it. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. I exhaled. "I'm done being erased." His nod was slow, steady. And that was the first moment everything began to unravel. But I had no idea what waited for me that night: a locked door, a replaced key, and a betrayal more blatant than anything they'd done before. That night, after the cookout, I drove to my parents' house expecting tension, maybe raised voices, maybe a passive-aggressive comment waiting behind the door. What I didn't expect was the silence. A hollow, rehearsed silence that felt like a scene someone had practiced without me. The porch light wavered in that familiar, tired flicker, but when I slid my key into the lock, it hit metal. Wouldn't turn. I tried again. The same resistance. The realization washed over me slowly, like cold water leaking through fabric. They had changed the locks. Before I could knock, the door cracked open just enough for my brother to fill the frame. Dylan stood there expressionless, no guilt, no explanation. Just a kind of stiff readiness, like he was performing a role Mom had handed him earlier. "Mom said you should call before coming by," he muttered. I held up my useless key, my voice barely above a whisper. "You changed the lock?" He didn't deny it. Didn't even blink. "This place is in transition." Transition. As if this house, the one I had fought for, sacrificed for, saved from foreclosure, was now shedding me like old paint. Behind him, I spotted stacks of moving boxes, his boxes. My mother and father stood farther down the hallway, close enough to listen, far enough to avoid responsibility. My mother's expression was firm, unreadable. My father looked at the floor the moment my eyes met his. "Move," I said quietly to Dylan. But he didn't. Instead he pulled the door in until only a sliver of light lined his face. For a moment his voice softened, almost apologetic. "Mel. Mom doesn't want any drama." The lock clicked. The porch light flickered. And I stood there alone, with a key that no longer belonged to anything. I drove home on autopilot, the world blurring past me. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were trembling. I forced myself inside, kicked off my shoes, and pulled down the storage box I'd hidden years ago. I emptied it onto the kitchen table, 5 years' worth of receipts, payment confirmations, mortgage statements, and copies of the trust that proved everything I did and everything they pretended not to see. I sat there staring at the paper mountain, my life, my sacrifices, my erased role, spread across a wooden table. I had saved the house because it meant stability, history, and family. It was the thing that survived arguments and unspoken grievances. And now they were rewriting even that. A knock snapped me out of my spiral. When I opened the door, Uncle Edward stood there. Hands in his coat pockets. Eyes calm and knowing. "You went by the house," he said. Not a question, just truth spoken out loud. I stepped aside, letting him in. He studied the papers, his jaw tightening. "Your mother is pushing harder than I expected. But the trust gives you more leverage than you realize." I blinked. What do you mean? He tapped a clause in the trust with one steady finger. This doesn't just make you responsible, he said. It makes you the one with authority. The words settled over me slowly, heavy, grounding, undeniable. And when I took those documents to a lawyer the next morning, I discovered something that would turn my family's perfect celebration into a day they would never forget. The next morning, I walked into Attorney Patrick O'Neill's office carrying the entire box of documents. My hands were steady, but inside, something burned, hurt, anger, resolve braided together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Patrick was a quiet, meticulous man with sharp attention that didn't miss much. As he flipped through the trust papers, the receipts, the payment logs, the room grew still. Each page he turned seemed to confirm a truth I hadn't allowed myself to fully claim. Finally, he looked up. "Melody, you're not powerless here," he said. "Not at all." I swallowed. "My mother is trying to transfer the house to my brother." "Behind my back." He nodded slowly. "And legally, she can't. Not with this trust. The person who makes the payments holds the controlling authority, not the original owners, not the beneficiaries. You." The words landed hard, but not painfully. More like a weight I'd carried alone for years was finally being acknowledged. Patrick outlined the steps I needed to take: filing a dispute, activating a temporary freeze on any property transfers, requesting a formal review, and submitting the evidence of payments that tied the house to me. "It's straightforward," he explained. "Once we file, they won't be able to move anything around, no paperwork, no signatures, no backdoor transfers. Everything goes on hold until the review is complete." "And how long does that take?" I asked. 3 days. 3 days. The same amount of time they planned to celebrate handing the house to my brother. I left his office with the documents already drafted. Back home, I sat at my desk, signed everything, scanned it, filed it, and sent it in. The confirmation email pinged a minute later. It felt like a pulse steadying itself. Then I waited. Those 3 days crawled and flew at the same time. I kept imagining my mother planning the gift, Dylan bragging about the house as if it were earned, relatives congratulating him for a future built on the years I gave up. But I stayed quiet. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't argue. I simply prepared. On the morning of Dylan's graduation celebration, the day she planned to unveil her version of the story, I drove down their street just as the sun rose. It stretched pale gold lines across the pavement, giving everything that soft, early morning illusion of calm. Balloons bobbed at the mailbox. Folding tables were set up in the front yard, decorated exactly the way my mother liked: coordinated colors, matching ribbons, perfectly arranged centerpieces. From a distance, it looked like everything she wanted, the flawless display of a family she crafted for show. But when I pulled closer, I noticed something unusual. A white city vehicle was parked right at the edge of the driveway. 2 officials stood on the porch, clipboards in hand, speaking into the doorway. Whatever was happening wasn't part of my mother's script. Not at all. And within minutes, in front of relatives, neighbors, and a yard full of decorations, everything she'd tried to hide came crashing into the open, starting with a sentence that froze her in place. From my car window, I watched my mother open the door to the 2 officials, her bright hostess smile already in place. But the second she saw the uniforms, the smile faltered, just slightly, just enough to reveal the crack beneath her performance. "Good morning," she said carefully. "Is something wrong?" The taller official lifted his clipboard. "Ma'am, we're here to deliver formal notice regarding this property. A dispute has been filed under the trust connected to the home. Due to the terms of that filing, no transfer or title change can proceed until the review is complete." My mother blinked, confusion and offense blending into a stiff expression. "There must be a mistake," she insisted. "This is our family home. We're simply transferring it to our son as a graduation present." The official shook his head with practiced sympathy. "Not according to the trust documents, and not according to the payment records attached to it." He tapped the folder. The listed authority belongs to the individual who made the payments. Not you. My mother's face drained of color. She stared at the clipboard as if it had betrayed her. Then her eyes darted around the yard, searching for someone to blame, someone to corner. And when she finally spotted me stepping out of my car, her expression hardened into something sharp and wounded all at once. Before she could speak, another sound cut through the yard, a mechanical rumble. A tow truck turned onto the street, slowing as it approached the house. It pulled into the driveway. Everyone stopped. Family members froze mid-step. A few neighbors peeked from their porches. Wooden folding chairs creaked as conversations fell apart mid-sentence. The driver hopped out and checked his paperwork. Looking for Dylan Dawson. My brother rushed out of the house, adjusting his shirt, his forehead already glistening. That's me. But you've got the wrong place. Vehicle repossession, the driver said flatly. Payments overdue. This is the scheduled pickup. The metal arms of the truck latched under the front wheels of Dylan's car. The sound echoed across the yard like a gavel striking. Mom! Dylan yelled, panic snapping in his voice. Mom, do something. Tell them this is a mistake. For the first time that day, my mother looked genuinely lost. She couldn't talk her way out. She couldn't rewrite the script. She couldn't hide the truth. Not from the officials. Not from the neighbors. Not from the relatives gathering on the lawn with wide, uncomfortable eyes. And definitely not from me, standing just a few feet away, calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. Just then, another car pulled up. Patrick O'Neill stepped out of the passenger side. Uncle Edward joined me at my shoulder. The scene was no longer hers to direct. My mother's voice trembled as she hissed, "You did this." She said it like an accusation, not a confession. I met her stare steadily. I enforced the agreement you signed years ago. That's all. Her jaw tightened. This is your brother's day. And for the first time, I replied, it won't be built on a lie. But the moment the attorney opened the folder and read the clause aloud, the clause my mother hoped everyone had forgotten, the entire yard went silent, and the truth finally tore through every lie she'd built. Patrick stepped forward, the folder tucked under his arm like a quiet verdict waiting to be spoken. He greeted the officials politely, then turned to my mother, his expression steady, professional, but not unkind. Mrs. Dawson, he said, the trust you signed years ago contains a clause that designates the person who made the mortgage payments as the controlling authority of the property. My mother shook her head quickly, almost desperately. That was temporary. It wasn't meant to be permanent. We only agreed to it during a difficult time. That's not how trust agreements work, Patrick replied gently. He opened the folder, exposing several pages, receipts, signatures, dates, transfers, every sacrifice I'd made lined up like quiet witnesses. He tapped one line in particular. This clause states that any attempt to transfer ownership without the authorization of the designated payer, he paused, is invalid. For a moment, everything on that lawn stopped. The breeze. The chatter. Even the shifting balloons seemed motionless. My mother's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked around helplessly, as if someone, anyone, might rescue her narrative. Beside her, my father stood stiffly, his shoulders slumped. His eyes were glued to the porch floor, every inch of him radiating guilt and avoidance. A cousin whispered loud enough for half the yard to hear. Wait. Melody paid the mortgage? All those years? Another cousin frowned. Why didn't anyone say anything? My mother's lips trembled, not in apology, but in panic that the version of events she curated for years was slipping through her fingers. That trust was for emergencies, she insisted shakily. It wasn't supposed to give her control. Uncle Edward stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. Angela, I set up that trust because you and Gregory were drowning financially. You signed it willingly. And Melody saved your home. If she hadn't stepped in, you would have lost everything. Her breath came out in shallow bursts. She turned toward my father as if expecting backup, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. For once, even he couldn't pretend. Patrick closed the folder and spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the lawn. Under the trust, Ms. Lane, he nodded toward me, has full authority over the property. What happens next is her decision. My mother looked at me as though the world had suddenly tilted under her feet. What are you going to do?" she whispered. I held her gaze, steady, calm, not cruel. "I'm enforcing boundaries. The ones you signed. This house won't be transferred." Dylan stepped forward, anger tightening his voice. "You're kicking us out? After everything Mom did for you?" The irony stung so sharply I nearly laughed. But I didn't. I inhaled and spoke softly, firmly. "I'm not throwing anyone out. I'm honoring the agreement. You just don't get to rewrite the story anymore." Behind us, the tow truck began pulling away with Dylan's car. A balloon string snapped and floated off, twisting in the wind, a small symbol of a celebration that had collapsed under the truth. And my mother, once so composed, finally looked undone. But the moment I told them how much time they had left in the house, the final boundary, the one they never believed I'd enforce, the entire crowd shifted, and my mother said something I will never forget. My mother gripped the porch railing as if it were the last solid thing in her world. The crowd around us had gone quiet, dozens of relatives watching, unsure whether to stay or slip away like witnesses to something too raw to witness. I steadied myself. "The trust states," I said clearly, "that once a dispute is filed, the original occupants have a limited window to relocate. You've already signed the lease for the rental across town." My mother's eyes widened. You're actually doing this?" Her voice cracked on the last word, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and something she rarely showed, vulnerability. "I'm following the agreement you made," I said gently. "I didn't create this boundary. I'm simply upholding it." My father's face tightened, his hands hovering uselessly at his sides. "Let's just calm down," he muttered, though it was clear he was talking to himself more than anyone else. Dylan, still humiliated from the repossession, stepped in front of my mother like a guard dog trying to regain pride. "So we're supposed to just leave? You think this house is yours now?" I looked at him steadily. "I don't think anything. Legally, and realistically, I've been the one keeping it standing for 5 years. He scoffed, bitterness twisting his features. "You're so dramatic. Mom protected this place." Protected. The word hit me like a cold slap. Patrick stepped forward before I could respond. "Mr. Dawson, your sister is the sole financial contributor over the past 5 years. That's not drama. That's documented fact." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Aunt Linda shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with something like astonished sympathy. "How could you all let her do this alone?" she whispered, not to me, but toward my parents. My mother's chest rose and fell rapidly. "I am your mother," she suddenly snapped, voice breaking under the pressure. "You don't get to do this to me. You don't get to take my home." My voice came out soft, but steady. "I didn't take anything. I saved it. And then you tried to cut me out of it." Her next words were barely audible. "We built our lives here." "I know," I said. "I grew up here too. I loved this place just as much as you did. That's why I fought for it. But you tried to erase me from the story." Tears welled in her eyes, not sorrow, not remorse, but the pain of losing control. The image she'd spent years constructing was collapsing in front of everyone. "You have 60 days, I finished quietly. 60 days to move into the rental. No tricks. No more secret papers. Everything goes through the attorney from now on." Dylan exploded. "This is unbelievable. You ruin everything and act like the victim." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not the victim. I'm finally the one drawing the line." A long silence fell. And then my mother whispered words I didn't expect. Words that would follow me long after that day. You were supposed to love us enough to stay silent. But silence was the one thing I was finally done with, and in the weeks that followed, as the dust settled and the truth reshaped everything, I learned a lesson I wish I'd understood years earlier. The weeks that followed unfolded more quietly than I expected, not peaceful, exactly, but honest in a way my family hadn't been in years. There were no explosive arguments, no dramatic ultimatums, no last-minute attempts to twist the story. Just the slow, steady unraveling of a narrative that had depended on my silence. The property review moved quickly. Patrick kept me updated every step of the way, and every document confirmed what I already knew but had never dared to claim. The trust was solid, the payments were indisputable, and control of the house, legally and practically, was mine. There was no loophole waiting to ambush me. No hidden clause my mother could weaponize. No verbal understanding that could override signatures and bank records. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't something they could bend. My parents left the house within the 60-day window. They moved into a modest rental on the other side of Rochester, small, quiet, nothing like the curated image my mother had fought so hard to maintain. She didn't argue with the timeline. Not once. She packed slowly, her movements stiff, her gaze avoiding mine whenever we crossed paths. My father helped her load boxes into the car, shoulders hunched, eyes down. I wondered if he ever regretted staying silent all those years, watching me struggle while pretending he didn't see it. If he did, he never said. Dylan took the hardest fall. Without the house, without the car, without the cushion of being the favored child, he had to step into a world that expected actual responsibility. He took a job at a warehouse nearby. Every time I passed him on the street, he avoided eye contact, staring at the ground as though it owed him something. Maybe the world was finally asking him to stand on his own legs. As for me, stepping into the house after they were gone felt strange at first, like walking into a version of my childhood stripped of its noise. The rooms were quiet. The air felt lighter. I could breathe. I started making small changes. Painting the walls. Fixing the porch step that had creaked my entire life. Opening windows that hadn't been touched in years. Taking ownership of the house felt like taking ownership of myself. One evening, standing in the living room with the golden sunset brushing across the floorboards, I realized something I had never allowed myself to think. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. It's clarity. It's choosing truth over comfort, especially when the people who should have protected you choose the easier path. I didn't destroy my family. I didn't shame them. I didn't seek revenge. I simply stepped out of the shadow they kept me in. And if you've ever carried the weight alone, if you've ever been written out of your own story, if you've ever been told your silence equals love, then hear me clearly. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to take back what you built. You are allowed to walk away from the version of you that others depend on but never appreciate. And you are not alone. Share your experience in the comments, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story.